So many people told me that I had no right to become an endurance athlete as heavy as I am. And so it was also to stick two fingers up to those that tell me it can't be done and show that actually you don't have to be a 65 kilo whippet to be able to run a marathon, let alone multiple marathons. Have you got a plan? And if it was, so it was a poll, yes or no. If the answer was no on the next Insta story, it was, if you haven't got a plan, do you have a why? And pretty much everyone that didn't have a plan didn't have a why. You can look at other people, you can see what they do, you can try and replicate it, but at the end of the day, all you can control is your performance, your work ethic, your impact on a situation or a game or a sport or whatever it might be. And I always say that I'd rather, as long as I've done the work and I look back and I think I couldn't have done any more, win, lose or draw, then I can be happy and proud of my efforts.
Yes, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another brand new Rugby Muscle Podcast. I'm your host, always TJ, and today I am honoured to be joined by John Clark, former Britain's natural strongest man and now absolute marathon, Ironman, endurance athlete.
Commonly known as stupid.
Just a very well-rounded athlete and gym owner who has given us the time in his evening today to discuss his training methodologies, his journey, and I really do think you guys are going to get a lot of value out of this. I could go through and list your whole resume and CV, and it would sound awesome, but rather I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. So, John, welcome aboard. Thank you for joining us, and let's start from the beginning and talk about how you got into Strongman.
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on. Always a privilege to be asked to speak on podcasts, so appreciate the invite. And yeah, in terms of Strongman, I mean, essentially it happened by pure chance, luck and coincidence. I essentially put 2 hairline fractures in my neck when a scrum collapsed way back when, and was told that I couldn't play rugby. Well, I could play rugby, but not in the front row. And as a tight end prop, my skill set did not translate to a move out of that front row union. So it was rather than not play the position that I love, and everything I love about rugby is that confrontation, the scrum, and the physicality of it. So for me, if I couldn't play in the front row, then rugby wasn't rugby for me. So I decided just to use those couple of years just to train, work on my strength, work on my weaknesses, try and get a bit fitter, and make sure that if I did go back to rugby, I was kind of bomb-proof, really. And then about a year after that accident, I was just training in the gym next to a random bloke, and he just turned to me and was like, "Oh, you're pretty strong." I was like, "Thanks." Didn't really know how to take it. But then he kind of then started talking about, "Have you ever considered Strongman?" At the time, I was about 108, 109 kg, so I was kind of borderline under 105 open weight if I was going to do it. And it was that classic thing, like I've always watched it on TV. We've all sat there at Christmas time, watched World's Strongest Man, and thought, "Oh, I wonder how heavy that really feels. I wonder if I could do that. I wonder if I trained, would I be able to do some of that stuff?" And so, yeah, that was back in the day. It was before Strongman was as accessible as it is now. So the only way you could find out about Strongman was this underground forum called the Sugden Barbell Forum. So long story short, he was a competitive under 105 athlete, and he took me under his wing and showed me the rope, showed me how to access the sport, how to get into it, and thought, well, I'll give it a crack. Entered my first competition, came second. A year later, won the British natural title. Year after that, won the Midlands non-tested title, got to England's strongest man, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it was something that happened purely by chance, and turned out I was all right at it. And we rode that wave as long as we could until injury curtailed that part of the career.
That's interesting. So I guess what age were you when you suffered your injury in rugby and had to stop doing that?
I think, good question. I think it was probably about 27, 28. So okay. Truth be told, I was considering that potentially being my last rugby season anyway, as it was one of those where it kind of, when you play in National League rugby, you're not earning enough money to warrant the amount of time that it needs to take from you.
Yeah.
You know you're not near enough, good enough to earn the money that you probably deserve for the time that you're putting in and investing into it. And I remember standing on the halfway line after we just scored a try the week before, thinking, I'm not enjoying this. Why am I here?
Yeah.
And then as it happened the week later, that happened. And it was actually the best thing that could have happened for me in terms of trying a new sport, going into something completely different. That gave me a foundation in strength and conditioning, and led me to then become a better strength and conditioning coach, become a gym owner, and brought me to where I am in business now. And now I've gone back to rugby kind of 7 years on. I absolutely love the sport for what it is, which is that true amateur rugby and going out there with 15 of your mates and giving it your best crack. So not only did it give me a completely different outlook on life, it also changed my complete perspective on what rugby is as well.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes it takes some of that, because like I've done the math on it a few times when you look at a good semi-professional career, and when I was looking at mine, it's like you end up like the amount of time that you dedicate, you end up way worse than like minimum wage. But it's because you love it so much. It's the only reason you're doing it. It's not. There's no glory. Like you can play even like the highest level. Like even like I know a couple of Sarries boys, and they'll walk around St Albans like home, and no one will know who they are. They'll just look at them because they're big. So there's no glory or there's no fame. Like no one, and like even then, no one really cares because we've all got short-term memory. So it is about the enjoyment for sure. Like, and that's what people got to remember, even when it's like when you're looking at the training and all that stuff. And I guess that's why you carried on training even with the injury, right? Was because you enjoyed that training process as well.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, I'm actually in business partnership with a couple of professional rugby players, and I can completely relate to that. Like a lot of people think it's such a glamorous lifestyle, the life of a professional athlete, but the amount of work and graft and effort and energy that they put in, and even if you win, like for what it's a short career. People have got a short memory. Yes, you may have the keys to the city for a year, but after that you retire. And I say with a lot of my sport and a lot of my, I say accolades, achievements, however you want to put it, is it's never standing on the podium or winning the game that you remember. It's the changing room after the win. It's the training that led you up to that point. It's the enjoyment and the relationships that were built along the way. And I think that's one of the things that kind of for a while in like semi-pro rugby, especially I saw when I was playing, it kind of got that soul was sucked out of rugby.
Yeah.
Because it was about chasing an extra 20 quid a week or moving to a different club because they gave you more petrol expenses. And not that was me. I'm a one club man. I've been with Malvern Rugby Club through the highs and the lows. But yeah, it's certainly one of those things where I think people forget the journey's the thing you remember. The best memories I've got are not necessarily the actual tries or the pushover scrums or anything like that. It's the shared experiences, the wins, the losses, and the journey that took you to that point.
Yeah, and it's also when you're in that environment, it's so easy just to put so much pressure on yourself that you forget to enjoy it. And I'm doing like a mindset module with a lot of my athletes at the minute, and that's one of the biggest things. I look back on my career and I think the amount of times that every training session, it wasn't even like about, even the training sessions themselves weren't even about getting better or enjoying those training sessions. They were about not making any mistakes because I didn't want to lose my position to like every training session was like a competition. And I'm like, I really do look back on my career and sort of regret that sort of mindset to an extent.
Yeah, I was the same. Like I remember one of the years the coach brought in match analysis, and my job was basically ruck inspection and scrummaging. And I remember that's all I did. And I was too scared to put my hand up and try and carry the ball or take a pop off just in case I knocked it on. And you just become so risk averse. And I think that can then translate into other parts of your life, and you become quite negative. And it's more like, how can I get through this with taking the least amount of risks? How am I looking for the high percentage stuff rather than the stuff that I could probably try and get better at, which would make me a better rounded athlete or a rugby player or a person. And I think, yeah, it is a difficult mindset when you're in that position and you're scared of getting dropped, losing that small amount of income that you are getting. And yeah, it's a complex situation. And I think a lot of people that chase that semi-pro professional dream probably don't appreciate that when you get to mid-30s, looking back, it's not that extra 20 quid a week you remember
For
the beer
sure.
after the game. Like that pint of cider tastes just as sweet if you won a National League or whether you've just saved yourself from relegation in the Midlands too. So yeah, it's the joy of hindsight, though, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess your hindsight would have been even like magnified because you went from, you know, that sport where you can sort of hide a little bit, you can sort of, and you put so much pressure on yourself, to strongman where there is no hiding place, it is just you. So were there a lot of lessons that going into or having competed in a couple of years of strongman that you look back on your rugby career and thought, ah, crap, like this could have been so much better, or this could have been so much better?
Yeah, massively. Like I was never the one that was shouting and screaming or trying to be a leader with anything other than just doing my job. And not that looking back, I think I would have tried to be a leader or tried to be a captain, because I think that's a thankless task in itself. But I definitely lessons learned in Strongman where it's just you on a stage in front of a couple of thousand people watching and waiting and seeing what you can do. It kind of put into perspective that actually putting my hand up to take more responsibility and trusting myself and backing my own ability would have probably led me to perform better, to contribute better to the team, to feel more confident around my peers and around my teammates, and just be a better bloke to have in the team. But you don't really learn those things until you get that chance to be an individual athlete. And that's one of the things that Strongman really attracted me. It was for the last decade, I've only played rugby, and all I'd known was you and 14 other blokes on the field giving your all. Whereas Strongman was purely you, yourself, and on your own. And then when I eventually left Strongman, went into a little bit of boxing, mixed martial arts, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that was the same. It was once you step over the whitewash and you're on the competition floor, there's no one else is saving you. It comes down to how much work you've done, how much time you put in, the hours that you've given to the task at hand, and there is no hiding place from that. You can't majestically create strength, and you can't majestically create jiu-jitsu knowledge. It's there or it isn't. And I think that's one of the things that I definitely translate back into my playing career was actually, if I'd have trusted the work that I put in more and trusted myself to take more responsibility, then I probably would have played a little bit of a higher level. I probably would have contributed more and probably would have been better for it.
Yeah, I actually did some jiu-jitsu this morning. I'm fully in that world now, and I look back on that as well. So I didn't know you that was Jesus. There's no like physical outlet that you don't do. I think I'm trying to be as well rounded as possible.
Yeah, for me, I bought a martial arts gym a couple of years ago before the whole COVID thing, because I was doing jiu-jitsu, enjoyed it. A friend who owned the gym wanted to sell it, and so I thought, well, why not? Let's add it to the list of things that we run and own and manage. And I fell in love with jiu-jitsu from there, and it was the closest thing to replicating rugby without the 10-meter run-up. The collisions, the physicality, the grunt work, like the things I love about a scrum, you'll get in a 3, 4, 5 minute round, minus the 20-stone bloke having a 10-meter run-up at you. So they allowed me to recover some of that physicality that I missed from rugby, and that's what actually led me, because I actually trusted that the body could hold up to the rigors of full-on physical contact sport again. Not that jiu-jitsu isn't a contact sport, because it absolutely is.
For sure, but it's not. It's not a collision sport. But yeah, I couldn't agree more with that stuff in terms of like with strongman, you're not going to, you can't suddenly amass some strength. That strength sort of like almost it is a competition, and all competition is like this in a way. But essentially, the work's already been done, and you've just got to exhibit that. And it's obviously a little bit like. And the more chaotic the sport gets, so you go from like a powerlifting or weightlifting to strongman, where it's a little bit more competitive, to then a jiu-jitsu where it's more competitive, but still relatively confined to a chaotic sport like rugby. But still, it only is based on, like, yes, there's a little bit of tactical element and whatnot, but it's all about the work that you've done already. Like all the hard work's already been done. It's now just going out there and showing it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the biggest lessons that I learned from my days as a strongman was that you can only control what you can control. Like I used to get so up watching other strength athletes upload their videos of their deadlift that was 20 kilos more than what I could lift, and it was just I used to get so annoyed and frustrated. But getting annoyed and frustrated at what they can lift doesn't majestically find me another 20 kilos on my deadlift. And that kind of then translates back into things like rugby and business and all the other stuff that I do, is that you can look at other people, you can see what they do, you can try and replicate it, but at the end of the day, all you can control is your performance, your work ethic, your impact on a situation or a game or a sport or whatever it might be. And I always say that I'd rather, as long as I've done the work and I look back and I think I couldn't have done any more, win, lose or draw, then I can be happy and proud of my efforts. My biggest regrets or disappointments in life are where I didn't necessarily achieve what I wanted to, but I actually probably on reflection didn't do as much as I could have done to affect the outcome to the way that I wanted to have it. And that led me to things like the charity fundraising that I do now. Is like a lot of people think what I'm about to try and do isn't going to be possible for a bloke my size with my lack of endurance, heritage and caliber. But for me, win, lose or draw, I know that I couldn't have physically, emotionally, mentally done anything more to get me prepared to do it, to start it, and to complete it. And if I only get 25 marathons in and my body gives out, then I can look in the mirror and be happy that I gave my all, rather than think, well, actually, I failed because I missed that training session, or I cut that interval short, or I didn't eat that bit of food that I should have eaten because I just couldn't be asked, or so on and so forth. The list goes. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of lessons in the individual world of sport that can translate into team sports and chaotic sports like rugby. Is that you can get so hung up on what the opposition and the others are doing, but at the end of the day, that doesn't affect how you control your own actions, your own emotion, and your own output.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like, especially with rugby, and this is something I've been exploring quite a lot recently. It's like, you can only control what you can control, and you're going to make mistakes, and that's going to be fine. But it's so much easier to blame. You can either blame the 15 guys on the opposition, or there's usually one or two that remember that number 4, he was a dick or whatever. And it's always, or if it's not the 15 guys of the opposition, it can be sometimes if you're in a way, it could be the crowd, it could be your other 14 teammates, or it can even if none of those are at fault, there's always the ref to rely on too. He was the reason you lost the game. And it's like, control what you can control, and you're always going to be happy, like no matter what. Like even if a referee ruins your game and with a terrible decision, you can still only control what you can control. And if you've done the work in beforehand, there's no reason to ever look back on a game and be upset. And
exactly that. There was a moment in time not so long ago where I was playing a game and changing room for the game, and one of our fellow front row players hadn't turned up, and he arrived 5 minutes before kickoff, stinking of Jack Daniel, hungover, obviously been out on the piss the night before. Someone found him and dragged him to the game, and I remember being really pissed off and angry and frustrated, and I played terribly. But I remember after the game thinking, we lost that because of him, and I was like, actually, we lost that because we allowed that to influence we'd lost before we went out on the pitch because we assumed that because he was over, our backs were against the wall. Whereas actually, if we'd have all applied our same up to compensate for where he's going to let us down a little bit, we'd have probably actually won the game instead of losing it by a couple of points. So even your own teammates that you can kind of almost sometimes blame, you can actually still retrospectively look internally and think, actually, I could have done something more. I could have done something differently that would have changed the outcome regardless.
Yeah. I guess that mindset is almost perfect for this new adventure that you're doing, which, I mean, we're nearly 20 minutes into this podcast and we haven't even brought it up. So sort of shame on me, but that must be a record for you because this is what you're planning to do. When are you doing it, by the way? Because this is a phenomenal plan. And why don't you just actually tell us when you're doing it and introduce the whole thing and what it's about?
So back in November, we ran something with one of my gyms called the Miles for Meals Initiative, which was essentially trying to get our gym members moving during one of the lockdowns over here. And we decided to try and run 3,000 miles as a gym community to raise £3,000. We ended up running 6,000 miles and raising £10,000, which fed 6,000 children at Christmas.
Awesome.
And brilliant outcome, brilliant community engagement, and something that genuinely made a difference. And it kind of felt that there was unfinished business with it. It was, for me, it's quite a topical conversation at the minute, especially over here with school meals and furlough and loss of income and things like that. And I thought that I didn't want to do something that was just a one and done, because yes, as much as you can make an impact, we can all do more. So I spoke to a few friends that have had a similar passion for it, and we decided to set up as a charity. So the Miles for Meals charity was born. And quite simply, it's got two aims. One is to raise awareness of food poverty that we face, especially in England, the rising, essentially, epidemic of more and more families that can't afford to feed their children. So aim one is to raise awareness, and aim number two is to raise funding. And then from that, we then thought, how can we take this Miles for Meals initiative around the country? How can we get more people engaged? How can we spread the message further than just my home county of Worcestershire? And as all these things normally happen over a beer, drunk with the front row rugby, front row union lads, and we were just chatting about stupid stuff and what challenges could we think of next. I've done a few ultra distance charity stuff and world record stuff previously, so let's see what we can come up with. And we came up with the idea of 48 marathons in 48 counties in 48 days. With the idea of big county and trying to get other people on board. So yeah, in less than 3 weeks' time, 5th of July, we start up north and work our way back down the East Midlands, down the Southeast, Southwest, and then back, and then finish back up in the Midlands. So yeah, it's become a logistical nightmare, as you can imagine, but we've got lots of running clubs, lots of gyms, schools, community groups, all pledging miles, pledging funding. So we're trying to raise £48,000, which obviously to co-align with the 48 tagline. And if we do that, that will feed over 35,000 children living in food poverty. So that's what we're going to try and get this old ex-battered rugby body to do. So we start in 3 weeks, and then that finishes on the 21st of August, all being well.
That's awesome. Awesome what you're doing for the charity. Awesome to completely subject yourself to such an immense challenge. We'll get into more of that challenge in a minute, but I want to sort of bridge from where you were with talking about this strongman career, becoming Britain's national strongest man, and even beating or winning untested competitions, which is actually a phenomenal achievement, to now entering this world of endurance, because obviously it's not something that you can take lightly. It's not something you can just sort of dip your toes into. I mean, no one can dip their toes into a marathon, let alone 48 marathons in 48 days. So what was what prompted the transition from strongman? I mean, you mentioned the injury, but what mentally did you go through to decide that you're going to be more of an endurance athlete?
Yeah, so essentially my strongman career got cut short by a knee issue. So I'd already had a couple of knee clear-outs, cartilage issues, MCL issues, so on and so forth, previously with rugby. And it always aggravated me and caused problems throughout my strongman career. And then progressed trained to then it became sore whilst I was training, and then it was just sore all the time. And like anyone that lives with pain, as all rugby players know, you just become used to it. But it all kind of gets to a head where I was up in Scotland competing to try and qualify for World's Strongest Man, and the knee just collapsed while trying to lift a pretty heavy farmer's walk, and then collapsed again trying to do an Atlas stone. Came back to Worcester, got it looked at, examined, and 3 different knee specialists. It was that classic, I'm going to keep going to a different specialist and I'll find the one that tells me the answer I want to hear. And they all told me the same thing, that you need not cut out for what you're trying to do. And essentially the patella tendon was over twice as thick as it should be. So the only solution to get rid of the pain was to go in and essentially trim down the patella tendon. But that would have given it at best case 75%, worst case 85% chance of rupture under load. And at that point I was squatting 380 kilograms. So the idea of patella tendon rupturing under that weight I mean, that's potentially life changing if that goes wrong.
Yeah.
Have a baby girl, and priorities change. Have a kid, family. It's not just about you anymore. And so I decided to retire from strongman whilst I had my 2 full working knees and my health. And yeah, it was just that one of those things where you convince yourself that what you're doing is what you need to do to be successful. And for me, that was becoming incredibly heavy. Competing as a drug-free athlete in a fairly drug-fueled world, I'd put on a hell of a lot of size just to try and recover and essentially keep up pace without any performance-enhancing drugs or anything like that. So yeah, I was 185 kilos, and it isn't until you then don't need to be 185 kilos that you look in the mirror and think, what am I doing? So it was one of those things where the intention was never to become an endurance athlete. It was just to lose a bit of weight. Started changing up my training, stopped focusing on top end strength, and just lost a few kilos, lost 10, lost 20, lost 30 kilos. And yeah, essentially for me, the real transition was 2019. I'd got down to about 140 kilos, and we decided to do a 24-hour individual ski erg to try and raise money for a terminally ill child locally that needed. And did 24 hours, broke I think 2 world records and a couple of British records. And it was then that my kind of love for endurance kicked in, and it was just like I actually, in a weird way, enjoyed the pain, enjoyed the suffering, and the mental fortitude that was required to see how far can you go, how strong is the mind, how strong is the body, what gives in first, and all the usual questions that come. And it was at that point I thought, right, let's try an Ironman. And I've now entered 3 Ironmans that have all been cancelled because of COVID. So yet to formally become an Ironman. So yeah, I can't quite call myself an Ironman yet, but that was really the transition. And then, as I say, COVID's kind of really messed with the plan, which was to try and become an Ironman. And from there, the charity stuff just kind of grew and grew and grew. Momentum gathered in charity challenges. And to be honest, it was also one of those things where so many people told me that I had no right to become an endurance athlete as heavy as I am. And so it was also to stick 2 fingers up to those that tell me it can't be done, and show that actually you don't have to be a 65 kilo whippet to be able to run a marathon, let alone multiple marathons, let alone 48. So that was kind of where the transition and change came. It was never an intention from the beginning. It was just something that kind of evolved and has now pretty much become my life.
That's awesome. Like it's interesting. The thing that gets me with endurance training, it's like it's not the pain that's the worst part. It's it's those few moments when you're doing a long run where you actually feel good and you're like, oh my god, this is awesome. Like I've already been going for an hour and I feel like I could keep going for so many more hours. That, and then it goes, and then you start to feel the suffering again. It's just,
yeah, no, it's a pretty unique thing. As I remember, the end of my training block to prepare for these 48, I'd just done 3 back-to-back marathons over 3 days. And I remember the 3rd day, I was probably about 15, 17k in, and I was thinking, this is easy. I am basically Mo Farah. I am going to. And then literally 3 kilometers later, I was like, oh my God, what am I doing anymore? And it's just amazing how literally in a heartbeat, your body can rebel, your mind can rebel. But again, you fight through it, you push through it, you realize you're tougher than you think you are, and you come through it and get the distance knocked out. So yeah, it is a incredibly insightful distance to try and cover, because it's not quite long enough to answer the world's problems, but it's long enough that you have to do quite a lot of internal reflection. And I joke with a few friends, it's exercising the demons. Yeah, it's an interesting distance, and I can only imagine where the mental side will go doing that for 48 consecutive days.
oh yeah, it's going to be interesting. Well, I think it also is like what must have been real difficult for you in terms of like completely changing almost who you are as a person, going from 180, like getting out of that world and going into endurance. That's a whole other world that not only did you never think that you would enter, but these people that are already in that world didn't Like, sounds like they actively didn't want you in. So there's a lot of challenges for the ego there, surely.
Yeah, I think ultimately there's a lot of sports that they like to think that they're special because they play that sport, and we see it in rugby. We see the whole like, oh, you got to be a man's man and you got to be tough and physical and a real bloke to play rugby, and football is a delicate snowflake. All the stereotypes that come with it, and I was naive to think that the running, the endurance community didn't have that as well. And I remember the first time I went swimming on the Ironman journey, and I was in on a lane swim, and there's a guy next to me, and I was a bit nervous about my ability to swim, so I gave the lifeguard a nod, that knowing nod of just keep your eye on me. And the guy in the lane next to me, who was a triathlete, turned around. He's like, "Oh, you new to swimming? What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, I'm training for an Ironman." And he looked me up and down. He was like, huh, "Yeah, good luck." And then jumped in the pool and off he went. And it was just like the arrogance and ego of it baffles me. And I've had a few people comment on my Instagram, just being like, "At what point in time does a marathon not become a marathon? If it takes you 7 hours, do you still think you ran a marathon?" And there's a lot of this whole concept that because that's their sport and that's what they do, that makes it special. And I had a fairly lengthy email from a random account sent to me a while ago saying that I'm disrespecting the marathon distance by trying to do multiple marathons, and they've completely missed the point that actually one of the things I'm trying to do is to open people's mind that you don't have to look a certain way to do anything. You don't have to look 60. You don't have to be 60, 70 kilos to run a marathon. If you're prepared to put the time, effort, energy, do the work, do the hard yards, do the time commitment that's needed, then you can run a marathon. And if anything, you'd have thought the running world would want more of that, because more people in their sport creates more eyes on their sport, creates more money, creates more sponsorship, creates better sports. But that being said, that's not everyone. There's been a huge amount of the community that have welcomed me with open arms and really intrigued by what I'm doing, and have offered to help and to run and to support and be part of it. So yeah, it's not everybody. It's not a stereotype. It's just a certain handful of people. But nonetheless, it does make you think that actually, do you know what? Like, there's a few people I need to prove wrong, and a few things that will motivate me and drive me. I know David Goggins talks about the cookie jar. So yeah, there's a few of those comments that are in the cookie jar that will come out when I really need that extra bit of motivation.
Yeah, it's weird because it's almost like if you think about like rugby and like there's like the local village club's fourth team, like they're still playing rugby. No one is going to say, hey, you can't call this rugby. You're not allowed to play. Like no, that they're playing the game because, and we've already touched on it before about like playing a high level and putting pressure. Like you're doing it at the end of the day because you enjoy it. And so who is anyone to say that you can and can't do a sport? It's kind of crazy, and it's like it's almost sort of rewarding to you to say these people are shunning you out and saying that you can't do it. Like it's so weird that people have that mentality. Like you can almost enjoy the fact that no one expects you to do anything. And that's good. Like if they're even asking the question at what point, how slow is a marathon to even be a marathon? Like who cares? Like that gives you all the license just to do it, and to do fucking 48 of them is, no one can say that that's not an effort, like at all, you know.
I appreciate that, and I think yeah, there is that element. I mean, there's very few people that I think genuinely think I'm going to get this done, and I'm one of them that doubts it on the daily. Like I'm not going to sit here and be, I've got this iron cast will that I will get it done. Like, I know shit happens. I know stuff can go wrong. Injury can hit. I might not be as tough as I think I am. Who knows? But I will. I know I'll give it absolutely everything. But I think one of the issues that we have, and this is kind of a question you alluded to earlier, is ultimately so many of us define who we are by our sport or our sporting achievement or the businesses that we run or our position in our jobs and our careers. And it's the quickest way for us to then get bent out of shape if somebody else comes in and challenges that identity and challenges that belief in who they are, or that doing something makes them special or makes them different to everybody else. And that was the same thing I had with Strongman. Like for me to retire from Strongman and move on to different sport, I had to essentially, to be who I wanted to be, I had to let go of who I was and who I was at that point in time, and focus on who I wanted to be. And I think so many of us get stuck in this cycle of defining ourselves by what sport we play, what level we played it at, and that's the barometer of how we measure our success in life.
That's massive, and that's something I've been playing with as well in my head. Is like people love to be like they want to pigeonhole people. So politics is like a perfect example. You're either left or you're right, and if you're right, then you share every single belief of everyone on the right wing, and if you're left, you share every single belief. Whereas when you look at any person, that you cannot put them into those holes at all, and especially as we change through life, and I think one of the biggest hits that you would have had to take is because of all that size you've lost, because you're not competing, you must have lost so much. And I say you lost strength, but essentially all you did was lose the weight on the bar because you're not doing it as much. And you would have done that on purpose because that ability and that training that you'd have had to do to keep that ability up just stopped serving you. But even then, it's still a hit to the ego because all of your previous life, any less weight on the bar meant that you were less successful, And so how did you have to sort of deal with that? And is it still a challenge that you kind of face when you look at a squat and you're like, I used to do like double this or whatever?
Absolutely. And it's interesting you say that, actually, because I literally changed my Instagram handle today, as I've now finally accepted that I'm not a strength athlete anymore.
That barbell's not bending anymore.
No, it isn't. And I think that's the thing. Like I put so much emphasis. I lived and died by those numbers. The extra calories I'd eat, the extra weight I'd put on, the extra recovery I'd do, the extra bits of work I did on technique and positioning and conditioning, and that took me to a 400 kilogram deadlift. And I lived and died by that number. That I dined out on that for many years, and to some extent, I do still quite enjoy sharing the video of me doing it. But the question changes. It's not the question with the barbell and with the gym is no longer how much can you lift. It's what training do you do to complement your primary goal. And it's the same as what we see in rugby and pro rugby, and you get those players that focus on being gym strong, but then what does that carry over to your positional performance in rugby? What does that carry over to your conditioning? Like, cool, you can squat 2 times your body weight, but does that make you a better scrummager? Questionably, who knows? But so for me, it was just a changing of the question. It was, why am I lifting this weight? And it was therefore taking the ego away from it. And for me, I actually had to remove things like deadlifts and squats and push press from it, just so I didn't have a direct comparison. And it's a difficult place to be when you're kind of early 30s and you realize you will never hit another barbell per lift. And as soon as you accept that and you know that you're not going to hit those heights and numbers again, you can then start to move on with the next phase.
Never say never.
Well, never say never. But
I think you can say never when those numbers are that high.
Yeah, I think when the numbers are that high, I know I can say never. But I made that mistake last year. My ego wouldn't let go of this. I'm the strong one. That's the thing that I'm known for. I'm good at, and that's what I've got over everybody else. And that defined me. And I remember pulling a 300 kilo deadlift, and it was like, I remember the program was working up to a heavy single with an RPE of 7 out of 10, and I literally blew every blood vessel in my head, and I pulled 300 kilos, and I was like, yeah, that's an RPE 7. And you look back and you're like, why are you such a dickhead? Like, just let the ego go. And so I call it a 365 lift now. So I want to be able to deadlift and squat double my body weight, put my body weight over my head 365 days of the year. And if I can do that, I'm happy. So I'm averaging and maintaining that for reps of 5 at the minute. So yeah, the question just changed. But yeah, it took a long time. And to some extent, I'm still dealing with the grieving of letting that go. But I think that's something that all athletes face. Like, speaking to some friends of mine that have recently retired from professional rugby, that they struggle to let go of that I'm a professional athlete and move into the next phase of their life. So I think we all will have that at some varying stage of our sporting career or accolade or whatever we're performing in. But yeah, that was definitely and still remains a difficult thing to deal with.
Yeah, it's holding on to our identity is it's very easy to do because it's as much as people want to pigeonhole us, it's easy for us then to pigeonhole ourselves just to be accepted by people, and also like hang our hat on the things that we did in the first place. And what you said about like rugby, like in terms of strength, you see it all the time. And one of the things that opened my mind up when I started coaching is when I really looked at the top level and I looked at Sonny Bill Williams, and his maximum bench was I think 120 kilos. You think this guy is the guy that's seen as the physical peak. You cannot get a better rugby athlete than this dude. He's benching 120. I'm 22. I can bench more than this guy. What? Like, but I'm clearly not as good a rugby player as him. So something here is wrong. And then it sort of opens you up to, and that changing the question to, is this getting me to where I want to be, is probably the biggest thing. And then even then it's still hard to accept that number going down. Like, and we're very quick in the fitness industry to shun the scale and say, you don't put your value on that number that's on the scale when you're standing on it. But again, it's just data. So the more, and same with your lifts, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I tell a lot of the guys that I coach is like, don't be that guy at the bottom in the rugby where you had trials for United, and like, don't be a I used to be a I am now. And I think that's a trap that we all fall into, especially those of us that have had decent careers in different sports in our 20s, early 30s. And as we start getting, I mean, I'm 34 now. So as you start getting to that part where you're now letting go of that part of your identity, like I want to be the guy at the family barbecue that's going, oh, what do you do? And I can talk about what I'm doing now and what I'm building towards, not hanging on to something that I did 10, 12 years ago. Like, for me, people that have only just met me now won't know about my strongman career because I don't bring it up and don't talk about it because it's just something I used to do. Yes, there's lots of lessons, lots of things learned, but if I hold on to that and try and dine out on that, I miss out on the opportunity to develop now and to develop and grow and move forward to me. And I think so many people don't change direction and change their outlook or change their goals because they're so worried about underachieving based on their former achievements in when they were 15 years younger. And that's why I say the question just changes. It's not how high a level can you play at rugby now. It's how can you get through a 24-game season and enjoy it and not rupture anything or need another surgery. So the conversation changes, the goal changes, the why changes. But if I let the fact that I'm now playing 4 leagues below what I was at my best affect me, then I wouldn't play. So, I think it's that whole be proud of what you've done in the past, but don't let it dictate your future and your present in terms of what next.
What's even cool about that is like, if you change the question, all of a sudden you've just opened up so much more room for growth. Like if you just carried on doing strongman, like maybe you'd have added 10 kilos, 20 kilos if you'd done phenomenal over these few years to your lifts. But then you look back and yeah, you've lost a good bit of strength, but you're not by any means weak. And now look at how much you've grown in the area of endurance, which was basically almost zero when you were doing strongman. I think that's what we've got to sort of open our mind up to. It's not the small percentage I'm losing in this direction. It's all of the new ground that I'm gaining in this other area of endurance or whatever it is. Like, and you said even changing the question to like when you're playing rugby. Now look at how much I'm enjoying it, even though I'm playing in significantly lower level or whatever. Look at how much I'm enjoying it, and that's at the end of the day all I wanted. Or look at how much I'm still able to play injury free whilst actually being able to progress with work, because there are so many rugby players that I know that they even if they're amateur, like they sacrifice, or they think they have to sacrifice so much just to train for the sport that they probably take away from their working life, and therefore like even like mitigate their earning potential because of it. And so opening up those questions it's massive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't know that at the time. No one knows it at the time.
If I could go back, if I literally appeared before my 21-year-old self and said, I am you in 13 years' time, this is the advice I'm giving you, and I still said, oh, fuck off, what do you know? I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And because ignorance is probably quite prevalent in youth.
And like after your strongman event, if you'd have come to yourself and said, hey, look, you're not going to be doing strongman in 2 years. You're going to actually be in endurance. You'd have been, fuck off, mate. Like, I'm going to be the best strongman I can be. You're right.
Exactly that, and I think that's one of the things I talk to a lot with my clients is like we get so hung up on mistakes, regrets, things we didn't do, things we didn't achieve, things like even like relationships we messed up. We let all of that affect our next steps and our future, and it stops us from doing things that we should, could, or want to. So that's always been my thing. Is like I get asked a lot on podcasts, like, "Oh, do you have any regrets?" And it is that cliche of I don't have regrets because at the end of the day, everything was a lesson, and it taught me to be where I am now and allowed me to grow and develop and move forward. And I think that's true with sport, that we get so stuck on our former glories that we never let go of it, and then that stunts our growth as we then move into the next stage of our lives after high level performance disappears.
For sure. And it's like, even that, like, when we're pursuing these new areas, I think you're still, or I mean, with you now, like, you're full in endurance. It's not like you're sort of doing endurance just to be good at, like, just to kind of be the strong man that can do endurance. You fully dropped that strongman identity. You fully embraced, like, you've changed your Instagram name, you know? And I think that's something that we can sometimes do to sort of really make sure that we're giving our best in this new area. Because sometimes we can sort of dabble in a new area, but the ego stops us from fully committing because of that fear of failure. So I think that leads us quite well into this 48 challenge, where, like, obviously you've already opened up and you've said already a few times on this, you're like, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to do this. So there's no fear of failure on your point. So is there anything that you can speak to towards that in terms of, like, being okay with the perception of failure, but still trying your hardest anyway?
Yeah, so I've spoken to a few people that have done stupid stuff like this, or have taken massive risks in business and sport and things like that, and chatted it through to them. And the prevailing theme that's come back with a lot of them is, what's the worst that can happen? Like, even if I go up north in 3 weeks' time and don't even finish the first marathon, we've still got 28 events happening across the country. We've still raised at least over £10,000 with those events as they're planned to go ahead. And the objectives are raise awareness and raise funding. So the absolute worst that can happen is I'll look like a bit of a dickhead. I'll get even more abuse on Instagram than I get already. And the boys will take the piss out of me at the rugby club for, oh, I remember when you said you do 48 marathons and you only managed 2. Like, that is literally the worst thing that's going to happen. Worse things have happened at sea, more like worse things happen around the world in everyday life. So what risk is there other than my own ego? And I've said countless times before, ego is the enemy of most of us, or ego, as the book says, ego is the enemy of us all. So put our egos aside and look at the positives. And it's like, well, but what if we get it done? What if we not just raise 48 grand, but we raise even more than that? What if we create a movement? What if we achieve those objectives of raising awareness, creating systemic change, and making a massive difference to the world that we live in? And so that's what I focus on. And it's that classic. It's you're 75 minutes into a game of rugby, you're 5 points down, you need to score a try. What's the next most important thing? It's the next phase, then the next phase, then the next. Like, stop looking at the clock, stop looking at the 30, 40, 50 meters you've got to go. Just focus on your one job, do that, then do the next job. And that's the way I'm looking at it. For me, the challenge right now is to get to the start line. Once I'm at the start line, it'll be to do marathon number 1, then marathon number 2, and so on and so forth. So I think so many of us get overawed with the size of the task, and that's then puts them off. And like, if we use the professional rugby player as an example, like, if you go to Owen Farrell and have outlined the last 20 plus years of what he's done to achieve England captaincy, where he is now, British and Irish Lion, blah blah blah, if you showed him that body of work that was needed to get to that point, would that have overawed him as a teenager and gone like, fuck that, I'm not going to be able to do that, that's way too ambitious, that's not doable? Or do you see where I'm going? It's one of those things, like, if we amount of work that was going to go into achieving a goal, we probably wouldn't do it. And if we focus on the negatives the things that could go wrong, we probably wouldn't do it. So let's focus on the positives. Let's focus on the things, circling right back to that first question. Let's focus on the things we can control. And then let's give it our absolute best, knowing that we prepared as best we can with the knowledge that we had available, the time we had available, the resources we had available, and what will be, will be. And if we get it done, outstanding. And if we don't, I can still look in the mirror and know I couldn't have done anything less. And I did an honourable thing in trying to do it, to try and make a difference, to achieve those aims of raising awareness and raising funding.
100%. I guess it is. It's so cliche when we look at like top level teams, and they're always saying, we're taking it game by game, or even, I'm just taking it day by day. But it's so true, because it is overwhelming, the amount, like, especially the amount of work that you must have to put in for this event. Like, if you've looked at every week, you looked at your whole calendar, you're like, fucking hell, I've got something, like, but if you just look at today, okay, that's all I've got to do. Is that really like the key to your motivation or dedication, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said from day one, like with my coach, Taryn, who's been programming for me, I was like, I don't want to know what I'm going to be doing in 6 months' time. Just give me this week and let's just knock that out. And then let's do next week. Because if you'd have told me back in January that in June you're going to have to find 24 hours a week to run, no chance. Absolutely. I could not find 24 hours in my week, but somehow those hours have been found. Mm-hmm. And I said that with him because he said, you've not missed a session. You've done every session that was programmed for you. And it's because when I get my program on a Sunday, I don't look ahead to the next Saturday or the next Sunday. I look, right, what have I got to do tomorrow? And once I've done that, I go, right, what's tomorrow? And then what's the next day? And you just tick it off. It's brick by brick, session by session. And again, like I say with my clients, you didn't create the body or create your fitness or create your strength in one session. You didn't lose it in one session. It's the average of what we do. Maintain a bloody good average and you can achieve a lot in life. And so for me, it's just ticking off every session one at a time, making sure that average work rate and average output is as high and consistent and high quality as I can make it. And not that stops me getting overawed by the task at hand. Like, I've got someone that's helping with my logistics for the challenge, and she sent me this all singing or dancing spreadsheet, and she's constantly telling me off because I've not looked at days 25 and have I confirmed this route and that. And I'm like, Nikki, I don't care about day 25. I care about day one. Just get me through day one, and we'll deal with day two after day one. Which some people will say is a short-sighted way of doing it, and you should plan ahead and plan and so on and so forth. But for me, like, it's pointless planning. It's like worrying about the future before it's happened. Like, let's just focus on the next thing, do that, and then move on to the next from that.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's not like you're not doing any sort of long-term plan. Your long-term planning itself was setting out this challenge, getting the coach, putting the people around you to help you help you be able to focus more on that daily. So it's not like you're just winging it day by day, because that's the other trap that people will fall into, right? Is that they'll just go to the gym and I go, okay, what am I going to do today? Bench press. Why? Oh, I feel like doing bench. Like, that's not what you're saying with this mindset. It's that long-term plan's there. You're just not in charge of it. Your focus is on the day-to-day, right?
Exactly that. And that's why I think everyone should have a coach, because there is absolutely a plan, but I'm not involved in that plan. My coach plans my training, my logistics person plans my movement, my GPS route and all that. They do all that. I just have to focus on the next thing. And that's why I put on my Instagram story yesterday, and I was like, for everyone that's training this week, have you got a plan? And if it was a poll, yes or no. If the answer was no on the next Insta story, it was, if you haven't got a plan, do you have a why? And pretty much everyone that didn't have a plan didn't have a why. And then the next question was, why don't you have a why? And the amount of people that replied to that with, I don't have a why because I don't have a plan, because I don't have any accountability, or I don't have a long-term goal of where I'm trying to go to. And they fall into that trap again if they just walk into a gym and they're ticking boxes, but they're not actually ticking boxes of value. We can all go to a gym for an hour, but how many of us train for an hour? How many of us go to a gym versus how many of us train at a gym? And that's a question I ask a lot of my members at the gym a lot. Is like, did we train today, or did we just turn up? And for a lot of us, just turning up is a win. Don't get me wrong. Like, for someone that's inherently not a gym person, just being at the gym is a win. So I'm not saying if you go into a gym and just ticking a box, you're failing, because you're absolutely not. That could be your version of a win. And that goes back to the previous thing of stop comparing yourself to others. You define your version of success. You use your own yardstick to measure your progress. But for those of us that are looking at high performance, those of us looking at goals and real progression and real development and drive, are we actually applying ourselves in that moment, in that rep, in that set, in that session? Or are we just ticking a box and mindlessly wandering around? And that's exactly why I believe high performance athletes or athletes should have coaches. And that's why I have them, because that means that if I'm doing an interval session, I know I just have to apply myself to that particular 3-minute run, and then focus. Then I'll worry about the next 3 minutes after I've done that 3 minutes, because somebody else has written this. I don't have to question it, double guess it, second guess it, think about it, question, am I doing the right thing? Because I impeccably trust my coaches and my support network and those people that have my best interests at heart. And yeah, so I think people that meander, wander around, necessarily don't see the progress that they want to, is because they probably haven't clearly defined where they're going, why they want to get there, and then as a result, don't actually have a clear plan of action in how to get to that point.
Man, regular listeners to the podcast would love to hear that, because I harp on about that sort of stuff all the time. It's like, you've got to have direction with this stuff. And that would even go back to the other question when we were talking about like your ego being attached to lifts and stuff. Like if you didn't have the plan to be this endurance athlete, you could have looked at your numbers now and you're like, oh crap, like I'm so much worse. But because you've got your why is these other things that you've got going on, you're allowing yourself to sort of dial that back a lot more and therefore not really be affected. Like even then, you're still looking at you, but in general, it's a lot more acceptable. It's a lot easier to stomach because you know that's part of the process. Whereas people that just go in and they're so like the people that just have to, the same people that have to bench a 1 rep max just to see where they're at, because they have no real why, they have nothing in place, so they can only attach their values to those numbers.
Exactly, and that's why I always say accountability will always trump motivation. Yeah. But that only works if you actually have accountability to a plan or a goal or an outcome. If you're 9, 10, 11 hours into a work day, you know you've got to go to the gym. There's no accountability, so therefore all you're relying on is your emotional response to your motivation to actually go to the gym that day. So as soon as we can create an accountability structure based around a goal, a program, and a systematic approach to get there, then we can take emotion, we can take motivation out of it, because we know that we just need to do what we're meant to do, and that will get us to our end destination and achieve the goal that we want to.
I mute myself. So I think on terms of like all this stuff, you've got these plans ahead of the 48-48. Have you got any other sort of real long-term plans for not just challenges, but who you want to be as far as like all this endurance and hybrid athlete style of training goes?
I think it's difficult because there's this kind of concept around this charity challenges are kind of becoming a bit fashionable, haven't they? There's quite a lot of personal trainers, coaches, and I've been asked a few times, is it just an attempt at PR and growing my own personal brand? And as I've said to those people, like, my own ego isn't big enough to get through for the whole point of the 48 for me is, yes, to make change, to help raise awareness, to help raise funding, but it's also to learn about myself, just as Strongman was, just as rugby was, just as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA, boxing, and all the other stuff that I've done. So in terms of where I want to go with it, I just want to keep exploring myself, my ability, my mindset, what I can do, find where my limitations are. And then if we find a limitation, can we break through it? And people keep saying that I'm escalating because I'll do something and then the next thing's even more stupid and bigger. So after I've done the 48, I'm going out to the Sahara Desert to run the Marathon des Sables, which is 250 kilometers over 5 days in the Sahara Desert, dubbed the world's toughest foot race. And again, for Marathon Miles for Meals, to try and raise funding, raise awareness, but also to learn something about myself. The ginger in the Sahara Desert is going to be an interesting equation. But it challenges yourself in different ways. You learn, you develop, you find new things out about yourself and what you're really made of. And then that, for me, health, fitness, training, sport is a microcosm for the rest of your life. If I'm willing to fail, if I'm willing to learn, willing to put myself out there in sport, in training, in fitness, that makes me a better person in all the other component parts of my life as well. So in terms of where I want to go, where I want to be, I don't have this set, I want to be this hybrid athlete where everyone thinks I can do X, Y, and Z. I just want to keep finding new challenges to push myself, to explore potential, to explore limitations. And the Atlantic Row is another one. So next December, me and 3 friends are going to do the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Crossing. So 3,000 miles in a rowing boat across the Atlantic Ocean. And again, 30 days at sea, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, relentlessly. It's a new challenge. It's the next frontier, so to speak. So yeah, where do I want to be? Where do I want to go? I just want to keep being open-minded, keep learning, keep showing other people that you don't have to be a certain person to look a certain way, to be a certain weight, to do anything. And if you're willing to put the hours, the time, and the effort, and the energy, and then to the large extent, you can achieve most things that you want to. And that's why I'm quite open and real, I suppose, on my Instagram, because I show the highs, the lows, the times I don't want to do stuff, the stuff I let myself down, and the stuff that I do really well in. Like it's an open book. It's not just this is my highlight reel. There's days where I really can't be arsed and I really struggle, and I wait for it to stop raining for 3 hours before I go and do my run. So yeah, I guess that's a long answer to a short question, but growth, challenge, make a difference, and look back when I'm sat in my rocking chair, if I get that far, and think, do you know what? I never said no to a challenge, learned a lot about myself, and was a better person for it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like just constant growth, and the idea of growth sort of means that you have to be open to whatever challenge. So you can't even set your like a long-term goal as this is exactly what I want to do, because that then shuts you off to other areas of growth. So that's super interesting. I think what I do want to know in terms of long-term though is I'll ask 3 questions. We always kick the first one off with what does the fitness industry look like in 20 years time, and will you still be involved?
I genuinely do not know how to answer that question. I mean,
it's a good
question.
It's always interesting when I get people's thoughts, because you get some people that are like complete pessimists and like, nothing will change, people will still be doing the same stuff. And you get people that are real optimists, or that so there are people that think that data is going to be everything. And there's lots of different ways that it can go, and there's no way of absolutely knowing for sure how it's going to be, man.
Yeah, I mean, COVID's shown us that anything can change in a heartbeat. How we view fitness, like how many more people now view training as their health rather than just for vanity or for aesthetics or for performance. Health is wealth is kind of a recurring theme that we keep seeing, and I think that's a positive movement. I think moving away from just training for aesthetics to have a certain level of body fat is absolutely fundamental to a healthier nation and a healthier world. Do I think it will go fully online, AI, data? No, because I think that people need people. Like, you can have a computer program spew you out the world's best program for you to achieve a 20 kilo deadlift increase, but they're not working with you to understand that your kid kept you awake all night, you've had a shit day at work, the wife's having a moan at you, and your head's not in it. Like, it needs that human element to be empathetic, to understand, to tweak, to support, to coach. For those of us that train, like, training isn't just go to the gym, tick a box. It's a lifestyle, it's a way of life, it's a social network, it's all the other things that come with it. So I think, yes, there will be more prevalence of online AI, data, Whoop bands, Strava, Garmin, GPS, all of that stuff is kind of obviously in fashion at the minute, but I think there will always be a human element because humans need humans, people need people, and I think that at the end of the day, we still haven't cracked it anyway because obesity rates are rising, and there's never been more data available to the general population on how not to be obese, overweight, or unhealthy. So there's a huge amount of work to do, and I think if you ask me where I'd like to see the industry in 20 years' time, then I'd like to see it in a place where we educate people first, and give actual factual information and help them to then use that information appropriately, rather than hand holding, spoon feeding, and just trying to sell the next best thing that's going to get them X, Y, or Z. And it's that classic: give a man a fish, you can feed his family; teach him how to fish, you can feed them for life. And I think the fitness industry needs to do much better at educating effectively those that are investing and engaging in it. And I think if we can crack that, then we'll probably go some way in terms of making an actual dent in helping people be healthier, fitter, and live longer and more fulfilling lives. And will I be involved? Who knows? My 5 businesses are based in the fitness industry, so more than likely I probably will be. And I enjoy it. I enjoy the change. The fitness industry looks incredibly different to what it did when I came into it 10 years ago. And I'm looking forward to seeing where it might be in 10 years' time. So will I be still involved? More than likely. But I'll probably be that guy still swinging a kettlebell around, telling you how it was different back in my day, trying to get everyone to do a Turkish get-up instead of focusing on their 1RM deadlift. Do as I say, not as I did.
Yeah. 2 points I want to go off of that. Was the first one being that you said about like not being AI driven, and I couldn't agree more, because it's also like if we're doing AI, if we're using some sort of AI to like just auto regulate how we've got to be for health, and then you enter into this system, hey, I want to run 48 marathons in 48 days in 48 different counties. It's just going to explode. It's just going to go, nope, doesn't compute. That's not healthy. Like there's a real gray area of what is health, because like I mean, like you see it now with rugby where they're making the sport, I don't want to say softer, but they are taking, they're walking a tight line here where they're taking a sport that is it's inherently unhealthy. Like if you ask a doctor, should you play rugby? They'll say no. You can jog, you can have other teammates in other sports, and you can, like, if you're talking about just solely, you can replicate all the benefits that you get from rugby in another sport. But at the end of the day, it's still something that we love, and there's some sort of primal thing about that, about combat and stuff that we do. So there is a line of health that
everything that we do in life has a risk.
Yeah.
We have to, as humans, and we don't do it like an AI equation would do it, because we are humans, and we use emotion and ego and everything else. But everything we do, there's a risk versus a reward. We get in a car, there is a risk we could crash. There is a risk we could be killed in a car. We go for a run, there's a risk you could have a cardiac arrest. Like you play football, we saw it at the weekend with the player that suffered a cardiac arrest on the field. Like everything we do in life, there's a risk. Like there's no way of living a life that's risk averse. And for me, is that even living? If we do everything based on, is there a potential chance something could go wrong? What kind of life is that you're going to live anyway? And I've said this before with the concussion thing around rugby, like education is the answer, not changing the game fundamentally to be different. Educating players at amateur level that if you got knocked out, guess what, dickhead, don't play next week. Like it's not worth the risk to your future health. Risk versus reward. Educate the person into what will happen or could happen if they ignore the guidance, and then it's ultimately up to them and their decision. And if they can't make the safe decision, then the medical team around them to do that for them. But I think that's the thing that we've seen with rugby, that we're trying to turn what is a game of risk to physical health and make it risk averse. And you're never going to be able to do that. And if you do this, you suck out. Like at the minute, I'm not, even if I wasn't doing the 48, I wouldn't be back playing rugby underneath the new amateur rules. There's no scrums, there's no mauls. That to me is the heart and soul of rugby for me as a front row player. Now, I'm obviously understanding if you're a back or a fullback, you have no interest in that, and you're like, great, we haven't got the fat kids slowing the game down. But for me, you can't take the risk away. You just have to educate the person to understand the risks that are involved, and then it's up to them if they want to do that or they want to put their body in harm's way to do it. But I've said countless times before, the lessons that you learn on a rugby field are worth the inherent risk to health long term. And I think every child should have the opportunity to play the game, because you learn so much, and you learn so much about yourself as well through the game as well. But yeah, rant over. I'll get off my soapbox.
Here, though, I couldn't agree more with pretty much everything that you said. And what you said about education was actually my other point, what I was going to say in terms of what the fitness industry is going to be like in 20 years' time. Because it is one thing to like really try to educate people, and the more you get into the fitness industry, the more you see other people educating and they're doing a good job. But then you turn around and you see some of these absolute complete nonsense Instagram accounts that have got literally millions of followers, and you realize that, like, unfortunately, as like TikTok and all this short form entertainment stuff comes in, and infotainment ends up being a lot more about the entertainment. And it's something that I think that's going to be one of the biggest struggles that we come with, is we can give all the people all the education they want, but if they choose to follow all the nonsense and all the fad diets, because at the end of the day that they keep being successful because they keep being successful. People want to hear the fad diets, they want to hear the quick fixes, they want to hear the insanity workouts that are going to lose them 20 pounds in 2 weeks. And it's hard to sort of reconvince people otherwise. And I guess the more we do podcasting, the more we do educational content, that sort of stuff, we'll keep hitting people, but it's whether people stumble across that as a thing, you know?
Absolutely. We all live in a bit of a microcosm, don't we? Like we think the industry, we follow like-minded people in the industry, and we don't follow all the bullshit that comes with it. And we think, oh, do you know what? Actually, the fitness industry is doing all right. And then you stick your head above the parapet and look a bit further. You look at your explore page on Instagram, and you're like, good Lord, we have a lot of work to do. But for me, it's the only way you can. It goes back to again what we were saying earlier: control what you can control. Like I've got a friend who is an incredibly talented coach, and all he ever does is rant about Instagram coaches on his Instagram, and it's like that isn't going to change people's perception. What you can do to change people's perception is what can you control? Impart your knowledge, share your wealth of information that you have, grow your audience, and do something about it by impacting, by giving correct information and accurate information, and information that actually helps, not Booty Blast 5000 and then moaning about some celebrity that's selling booty tea. And I think, again, it goes back to that whole idea is if we want to make the industry better, we can complain and piss and moan and everything else, but the only way we make it better is by the actions that we perform within that industry. And we saw that with, again, a microcosm in another industry in the martial arts world. We saw it with how many people are moaning about how much Logan Paul got paid for the Mayweather fight, or how much Ben Askren got paid for the Jake Paul fight. And it's like, instead of the UFC fighters moaning about how much he got paid, why don't you do something about it with how much you're being paid through the UFC? And it's kind of like a microcosm of how so many people deal with it. Instead of actually going, right, how can we make a difference to the situation? It's let's just moan about other people that are doing something that you don't agree with. And it just feeds that whole cancel culture, that whole constant negativity that we see on so much of the internet and social media. So yeah, my advice to any fitness professional, coach, athlete, aspiring, I hate the word influencer, but aspiring voice in an industry is, if you want to do something about the poor state of your industry, then that starts with your actions, your input, and what you give back to the world, not by slagging off what they're doing, because you're not going to affect their 2 million followers with your 35 followers moaning about their Instagram content.
Yeah, and it starts with your content and what you can do, and it ends there as well, because that's all you can do is produce the best stuff that you can do. And yeah, you can still tell people errors they make, but there's one James Smith, and he's done incredibly successful from it. But then the rest of that stuff ends up being like a bit of a circle jerk, and it's all the educated people that are already educated telling each other how great they are at shutting down everyone else. And I'm like, who's this helping? Like, if you're gonna like reject those other, those influencers and whatnot, do so in a way that if someone that thought that was true actually then goes, oh, okay, this other thing makes sense, as opposed to if you just attack, like, people are going to shut down anyway. So I don't think it's helping at all. Control what we can control, right?
Here's the thing, right, with James Smith. The people that are up in arms and absolutely hate him are the academics. The people that know so much more than him, but are frustrated that they don't have the following and the influence that he does.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason he has the following and the influence that he does is because he's made the complicated simple.
Yeah.
Well, for years, we've known calories in, calories out, energy balance, step count, like all of that. We've known that, but none of us have managed to crack that into making it simple, digestible, and publicly consumable. Yeah. So the people, I actually look at James Smith and, like, I can't help but be impressed by what he's done. Yes, he can be a knobhead, but so can we all. Yes, he can post some things that are divisive and you disagree with some of it, but that's called human nature. Like, there'll be stuff that you and I would disagree on if we spoke long enough or I followed you long enough. You guaranteed to put something of that. I'd be like, actually, I don't agree with it. But, and this is the thing, like, the people can sling out people that do have a big audience. It's normally because they're jealous and bitter that they've not been able to engage that audience in that way, because they think they're better, they know more, or they should be further ahead than they are. But again, like, it's tall poppy syndrome, isn't it? You can keep trying to cut them down, but that's not going to make yours grow any faster. The best way for you to grow faster is to actually successfully leave clues. Like these influencers and Instagram people with 2 million followers peddling absolute bullshit is actually, how have they grown that audience? How have they created that? Is there something I can learn that I can plug into underneath my own morals and values and use that to better my audience, to better my reach, to expand the audience that I can communicate with, rather than that person's a dickhead, let's all publicly jump online and slag them off. So that's my take on it. And it's just, again, like, make the complicated simple, and that's what our industry loves to do. Like, not so long ago, everyone needed their own personal plan, and now it's kind of come full circle. And as long as you squat, push, pull, hinge, and move multiple times a week through multiple rep ranges, you're pretty much 90% of the way there. And that's why the fitness industry doesn't like people like James Smith, because he's made what should be a complicated topic matter become digestible and understandable, and something that you can now actually action.
For sure. I actually really like James. I think like the vast majority of his stuff is, and you remember who he's trying to, all he's trying to do is educate enough people, and the bigger his net becomes, the more people succeed, and he's not giving any malicious, misleading information that's actually going to hurt people like some of the other influencers might do. And I think that what's as a consumer, the advice I give to people sometimes is like, they say, oh, how comes these accounts have so many millions of followers? And I'll be like, are you following them? Then there you go. Like, you're helping feed that machine. And people forget that. Like, if you want to, like, you vote with your money in this economy, and in the economy of social media, you vote with your follows and your likes. So, and also, like, I've never understood the idea of following people that give you any sort of negative emotions. Like, just unfollow them. That's a complete waste of your time. Anyway, I think these are things that we want to focus on, the things that we can control, right? So one of the things that we can also control is the music that we're playing on our gym playlist. So what's one song that everyone needs on their playlist?
I thought about this all day. So the movie that actually inspired me the most as a kid in terms of sport and my belief of how awesome fitness and training is, was the movie behind me, Rocky IV.
Yeah.
Go with No Easy Way Out.
I'm so happy to put that. I'm adding it to the playlist now. We've got one. It's slowly going. I've got to make it. I actually haven't even made it public. So actually, below this podcast, I'll post a playlist, because there is a big range. But that's a great one.
That's or any kind of exercise. If I bang that on, it's that whole just remind all those memories of that film as a kid. The whole no pain when he's doing the ridiculous exercise in the barn. So yeah, it brings back good memories. Remember childhood dreams of looking like Rocky and Rocky IV and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll go with that one.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that movie and that training montage is it's as simple as it gets, right? And look at how great shape he's got, and he beat Drago, who was there with all the technology, all that AI probably driving his workouts and getting himself injected, and Rocky just good old fashioned hard work. Let's not cut any deeper to that because that was exactly what happened with the montage. I don't care. Man, John, this has been great. I've really enjoyed this one. And I'm sure the listeners have too. And if they want to get in touch, because this will be out before your 48, so they'll want to get in touch, follow your progress. Hopefully, throw some cash your way, because obviously that's going to help, and it's going to go to a real valuable cause. So, how can listeners get in touch and find out more about your challenge, yourself, and
yeah, I mean, in terms of if you want to give the charity a shout out, then it's just at Miles for Meals on Instagram. If you want to follow the journey, I'll be documenting it through my Instagram primarily, which is now at _John.Clark, Clark without an E. And yeah, I'll be sharing daily progress, what's happening, and how we're getting on. And then yeah, it's essentially just ultimately go back to those two aims: raise awareness, raise funding. So even if you're not able to donate, I understand financial economic times are a little bit rough for a lot of people. So even if you can't afford to chuck us a fiver or help out in that way, just sharing the cause, sharing the charity page, sharing what we're trying to do, or even running for the charity and raising some funds that way. Anything like that, massively appreciated. My inbox is always open. I'll always reply to every inbox that I get. So yeah, slide into my DMs if you can help in any way, shape or form, or just share the message and share what we're doing, and that would be massively appreciated.
Awesome, mate. This has been really good. I'm so glad you came on. Glad we got a chance to connect, and I'm sure that, our listeners will get in touch and follow that, because that this challenge is it's really intriguing, man. I'm excited to see how you get along, and then Jesus Christ, it's not like it gets any easier afterwards either. So looking forward to seeing all of that stuff, and appreciate you giving up your evening to come on, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, massively. Same back at you. I really enjoyed it. Good to catch up, and appreciate the invite and giving me the platform to share a bit of the message and what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. So really appreciate that, and thanks for everyone that's got through this far of the podcast and still with us at this point.
Man. And if you've made it this far and you're still not clicking that like button, I don't know what is going on there as well. People got to do that. Yeah, exactly. Put the comments below. You've got YouTube as well? People can go follow, right? I guess if they just type in John Clark without an E, they'll find it, right?
Yeah. Let's say yes, I have a YouTube, but I haven't actually made it. I did start a docu-series in the build-up to this, but then COVID just took over, so I actually haven't filmed or edited anything for a fair while. But yeah, there is a YouTube channel. I think it's just if you Google John Clark Strongman or John Clark 48, you'll probably have a good chance of finding it. I'm not actually sure what the channel's called, but I'll send you the link and put it.
Even there, if we get enough people following you and subscribing you there, they'll peer pressure you into making some new videos as well, man. So
yeah, anyway, well, there's a videographer that's going to document the 48, so hopefully there'll be a deep documentary at the end of it that will show the highs, the lows, and how we end up.
There you go, mate. Awesome. Well, thank you once again for coming on. This has been great.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate it.